Whoa, is that PewDiePie with a first gaming PC build surprisingly using Linux, ladies and gentlemen? Whoa, that's actually pretty wild. One of the largest YouTubers is kind of mainstreaming Linux. And generally speaking, I was pretty shocked when I saw this. That was absolutely not on my bingo card, to be honest with you, when I saw this shit a couple days ago. But of course, it's not just PewDiePie doing this. Apparently, he's also installed Arch Linux on a laptop. So kind of a wild thing to be seeing over here. Somebody entering the Linux phase, especially mainstreaming it in a way like this. But of course, it's not just one YouTuber doing this, albeit one of the largest. It's also looking at some of the biggest games in the market, like Marvel Rivals, that apparently in their patch notes this year, they even straight up mention high-end computers running Linux was mistakenly tapping into low-quality UI resources. You know how shocking it is as a gamer, as a Linux gamer, to see a patch note reference Linux without saying we're removing players because of the anti-cheat or whatever. No, it's kind of insane to see one of the largest, most popular games right now, in today's day and age, actively supporting Linux. So, of course, these are just actual serious wins that I want to chalk up and say, yeah, these are pretty massive. And I really do think that people are slowly but surely wanting to switch over to Linux. And there's a lot of reasons for it. Obviously, as you all have probably realized, Microsoft Windows 10 is dying this year. I made a video about it a couple weeks ago, and generally speaking, Windows 10 is EOL, which is end of life. And unless you're using Windows 10 IoT or specific additions to extend that life, basically meaning that after a certain period of time this year, about October, you'll stop receiving updates. And some of those updates include security updates. And you can imagine that without security updates on the most popular operating system in the world, Windows, it can be a little unsafe traversing the internet. I mean, if you go all the way back to Windows XP, and this is a pretty extreme example, just connecting that operating system to the internet without any form of firewalling is basically begging for a Russian botnet to grab your computer and use it for all sorts of nefarious purposes. Now, obviously, if you look at the Steam survey, 97.5% of users on Steam use Windows. Now, obviously, Steam is more directed to gamers, and it's not a great representation of the overall PC market. But for us gamers, it's probably important to see that Windows 10 has 53.34% as of February 2025 still using Windows 10. And of course, 44% are using Windows 11. And there's still 0.1% who are logged in to Windows 7. Now, obviously, this is a wild metric. You might be wondering, why don't people go from Windows 10 to Windows 11? And when I made my video a few weeks ago, something that I noticed in the comments, a lot of comments were basically saying, I would update to Windows 11, but it says my computer is not supported. Now, Windows 11 has some requirements, specifically hardware requirements for soft security, like TPMs and whatnot. Realistically, the part of the minimum requirements that is probably more important and more restrictive is the CPU. Something pre-2017 from both AMD or Intel is usually what's going to be holding you back. And this hardware, while it's old, is not incapable of playing budget gaming or esports-oriented titles. So if you're somebody that wants to keep up with the modern times and have modern support, you may not need to even have something like Windows 11. You could, theoretically, switch over to Linux or still be using Windows 10 as long as software continues to support it. But yeah, that's really a choice you have to make. So that's where I kind of wanted to tap in today and really show you how you can install one of the hardest versions of Linux with complete ease and get this stuff set up faster than you ever could have thought of. So I'm going to teach you things today. I'm going to get you up and running. I'm going to get you through that complicated mix just so you can actually switch to the Penguin. So generally speaking, one of the first things that I see people try to do is they go onto Google and type in, what is the best Linux? Now, Linux comes in many different flavors, distributions we call it. Think of these like ice cream flavors. There's a lot of great ice cream flavors, but there's probably 6 or 7 that are just the all-time best and beloved by by everyone. And those are probably the ones you want to stick with starting out. And then you can experiment down the road. We call it distro hopping. You get the idea, hopping from distribution to distribution, and see which one you like the best. So according to this one page, runcloud.io, it just sort of lists Linux distributions. So I'm going to go through my personal Linux distribution recommendation list to sort of show you what you can download and play with. For instance, you can go to ubuntu.com and download Ubuntu Linux, which is my actual first Linux that I've ever used, my first distribution, and generally it's very good. It's pretty good for most people. There's also Fedora Linux, okay, at fedoraproject.org. You can download this Fedora workstation and you can start from here and use the Fedora Linux system, which is absolutely good. It works just well. I've shown you Linux Mint in the past, and you can download this and try it as well. It's also the same distribution PewDiePie showed in his video. And this one is so easy to set up that literally, if I had to give anybody a beginner Linux, I even have an entire video titled How to Switch to Linux for Beginners, literally showing how to set this up and get your gaming up and running. Of course, there's also other ones like OpenSUSE Tumbleweed, which is very stable and it's very much designed to support super high-end hardware. And it makes the entire process as easy as you can imagine. There's also Bazzite Linux, which I've showed you as well. This one I actually have installed onto a computer desktop I have downstairs in my basement that serves as a game console that I call the Mudabox. And you really can just install this and start absolutely gaming from literally nothing right off the bat. And it's so easy to install that you can install it onto Legion Go devices, you can install it onto pretty much any Steam Deck-like device, laptop, desktop, whatever. There's also Pop! OS, which is an amazing distribution. I personally don't like to use it, but I've seen great work by System76 to make this improved since the years I've tried using it. Now you might be like, stop Muda. I want to know the most elitist version of Linux. Ooh, the one that everyone talks about. That would be Arch Linux. Now I've shown you how to install this from a command line, literally from just typing in a bunch of commands at a black screen with a blinking cursor to getting a working graphical user interface. And while I recommend you do it that way as sort of a learning procedure to figure out how installing this system works, how Linux itself works at its core, I'm going to show you how to install this thing without actually, doing much at all. So first things first, you want to download Arch Linux, and basically their website appears very simple, but you want to go to the download page, and in the download page, I highly recommend you use BitTorrent, just because it makes server costs for them not so costly if you just use peer-to-peer sharing. But of course, if you want to download the classic method, you can find your country, click on any of these links, for instance, and just download from here. So since I'm Canada, I can pick literally any one of these, like this first link right here, and you want to find out the first page, Arch Linux, 2025, yada yada yada, ISO. And this will basically be denoted by a file size. You're probably looking for the largest file size in general. So just click this, download this somewhere on your system, and you have the ISO file. Now it's time to burn it to an actual installation medium. Now typically you could burn this to a DVD drive, but I don't think many of you guys probably have a DVD drive in your system. Correct me if I'm wrong. You probably have an 8 gig or larger flash drive sitting around at your house. So at this point, you can just copy and burn it to these flash drives. Now, provided you have nothing important in this, it's time to download a tool to help you burn this flash drive. So one of those tools you can get is Rufus, which this is just on a tangent. If you're installing Windows 11 and you feel that you want to get rid of some of those unneeded requirements, you can actually use this, and I believe it has checks inside it so that you can remove current requirements. I don't know how useful that'll be until Microsoft starts mandating things, but you can use this to make a Windows 11 installation that can run on unsupported hardware for now. But there's also other tools like Balena Etcher, for instance, which is what I prefer, where you download this, you simply select your image, you select the USB drive that's plugged into your system, and you just simply flash the ISO file you downloaded to your flash drive. And once that's done, it's time for you to actually get to the installation phase. Now take your USB, plug it into any USB 2.0 drive on your system, not 3.0, those little blue USBs, just because you want to have something with super compatibility. Now, when you restart your computer, you're going to have to tap the F1 to F12 keys or the delete key or whatever key at the first splash BIOS screen on your computer. Now, this is different for every single motherboard, so experimentation will be required, but generally you want to get to something known as a boot menu. And if you've done everything right, you'll probably see your flash drive with, listed in that boot menu. So at this point, you want to boot into your flash drive, and you'll be presented with the Arch installation splash screen. Now, to make this look a little easier for the audience watching, I'm doing this in a virtual machine just to make it easy to record. When you have it plugged in, you'll see this screen right here. Now, you can click the first message, Arch Linux Install Medium, which this is all you really need. If you've just built a new computer, maybe you want to try memory testing it. Whoa. What's with the beeps? You want to try memory testing it just in case you just built your computer and you want to make sure the memory has no issues. This would be pretty much a recommendation for any operating system you install, not just Linux. Could be Windows as well, just to make sure you don't have a bad batch of memory, which can cause problems down the road. But if everything is all kosher or halal, depending on what your religious affiliation is, hit the first option and boom, you'll see a little black screen first, don't freak out. But you'll see all of this text showing up. And basically, Arch Linux is starting its installation medium on your system. Now, it's advisable that at this moment in time, you go to the Arch Wiki. Now, the Arch Wiki is one of the best learning guides for any Linux tutorial, any Linux distribution, in my opinion. But for Arch Linux, it's like the secret sauce that helps you pretty much figure out any problem, any software right off the bat. There's so much documentation for this that you could be an absolute beginner and this thing would guide you through the entire process. Now, if you want to install Linux the old-fashioned way, you can follow this entire guide yourself. It literally does seem daunting, but it is the option of just following these guides, following these steps, and just effectively installing Linux on your own terms. So the first thing that it kind of tells you about is just verifying what your boot mode is. So because we're using a modern system, you're probably wanting a 64-bit boot mode. So literally looking at the actual the wiki page, this little box where it writes out all these characters, all the strings, anytime you see this in the wiki, it's just what you type into the Linux terminal shell. Now the terminal is that spooky little thing that, it looks like the hacker console for Linux. I don't want you to be super scared of this. We are going to be using this, but think of it like a ultimate Swiss Army knife, okay? Anything that you could imagine wanting to do with your system, the Linux terminal will let you do it with absolute ease. You could string together commands. You could be a fucking wizard and do anything you want to your computer with ease just using the terminal. So effectively what it's asking you is to just check if, this platform size reads the number 64. So if you type the string in and the command returns 64, you've booted into 64-bit UEFI. If it reports 32, then you're using 32-bit systems, which again is probably not a computer you have unless you're dealing with your grandma's computer from 2 decades ago. It's crazy shit. Sys firmware EFI, and then do FW platform size. And of course it reads the word 64. Now at this point you also want to type in the words IP link to make sure you're actually connected to the internet. You can see that one Ethernet device I have says up, and to make sure that we actually are connected to the internet, you can ping Google just a couple times to see if you get a response. Oh, look at that! We're alive! Google is typing back to me. Control-C just to kill the command so you don't constantly ping Google and bother it. But here at this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to show you the easiest way to install Linux. Do arch install, and boom! Once you've done that, it basically launches something known as the arch install script. Now here, I'm going to walk you through every step you need to make sure you can install Arch and basically have it set for you. And I'm going to teach you exactly what each of these things do. So in the first language, you can see the actual language for this. You want to make sure that you pick whatever language you're comfortable with. I'm going to go with English. In locales, it's going to ask you to set your keyboard layout. I'm in the North American region, so I'm going to go with the US layout. Locale language is NUS, and the encoding is UTF-8. So again, depending on where you live, you may need to modify this locale. But of course, once that's set, you want to go to mirrors. Now mirrors is where Arch Linux and most Linux distributions will talk to get updated packages or software from the repositories. So you go to the mirror region, And over here, the general way you want to do this, you want to pick the country you live in. So I live in Canada, and the way you navigate this script, by the way, is use the directional keypad, the enter button for selections, and space in this case, so you can actually just select and move along this list. So you want to pick the country you're in, and you also, just for safety's sake, you want to pick the country that you're next to. So since I'm Canadian, the country next to me is the United States, and I'm going to hit the United States and just smash enter. Now, at this moment in time, you want to just go back and you're good right there. So go to disk configuration and you want to do partitioning. So inside here, you've got 3 options, right? But here you can do manual stuff. I'm going to go with use a best effort default partition layout, which basically will let the system do it. Now here you'll see all your drives listed, and you want to be a little careful. If you know what drive you're going to based on the model, then you can just select that. But again, you don't want to format something that has special files on it or, important files, so to speak. So since I only have one for demonstration purposes, I'm going to hit enter on this. Now it's going to ask you file system. And now, generally speaking, you should go with extended 4, but I'm going to go with BTRFS because it will allow you to have like the best backup solution down the road. So hit enter here, and it'll say, would you like to use this with default structures? Hit yes. Would you like to use compression or disable copy on write? Copy on write's kind of like the secret sauce for this, so just use compression. And here you can add things like LVM and whatnot, but we're not going to do that. We're going to go back. And here you can do disk encryption. Since I'm at a home computer, I'm not going to do this. Typically, you will want to do this for like a laptop if you're going places where you think your drive or laptop will get snatched. So I'm not going to do it. We're going to go to swap, which is swap space, so your paging file. You want to make sure that just says swap on ZRAM enabled. So since it is, go down. In bootloader, you can pick which bootloader you want. I'm going to go with system D boot, so we're going to hit enter there. Unified kernel images, we ain't fucking with that. We're going to go down to host name, and here you can name your actual system. Now I'm going to call this YouTube, for instance, just to make it super duper simple. Hit enter. And of course, in root password, think of this like your administrator password, right? Your big super user password. And just put in any password you want. So enter it once, confirm it, and then of course you want to go to user account. Now, depending on how many people you're adding as users, I'm only going to do one. Go to add a user and type in your name. So I'm going to go with Tom, and password, feed it whatever password, enter it again, and it will ask you, should Tom be a super user? So should Tom have administrator privileges? I think so, so I'll give it yes. And of course, once you're done with all of the account adding, just do confirm and exit. And then profile is an important part. So go to profile, and then here you want to do type, and this is where you get to pick default profiles for what type of system you're building. So we can do it for a desktop, which that's what we're going for. There's a minimal way, there's a server, and there's a Zorg function too. Since we're doing it for a desktop that we're going to be using as a primary computer, we're going to go with desktop and hit enter. So over here, you get to pick all of the different desktop environments. So this is basically where you get the graphical user interface for your system. Now, every single one of these has their perks and benefits to them. Some of them are more optimized, some of them use less resources, some of them may be less flashy, some of them may be more flashy. Some of these are quite literally different things, like tiling managers. So Hyperlane, for instance, is a tiling manager that is all centered around not necessarily using your mouse, it's just navigating with your keyboard. Now, there's also GNOME, which, is very standard on things like Ubuntu. But KDE Plasma is the one that I recommend for everyone right now, because generally speaking, it's the one that I've always been using for years, and it usually has most of the features you want for a modern user interface anyways. But you can experiment with whatever you want. Seriously, look up every single one of these and see what interests you the most. So we're going to go with KDE Plasma and just hit enter. So of course, here you got your graphics driver. Now, PewDiePie in his video was using a pretty AMD build. And this is where I'm going to just put the secret, I'm just going to put the $150 down here. AMD is way better on Linux than using Intel or NVIDIA. That's not to say you can't use Intel or NVIDIA. This system I'm using has a 4090 in it. But obviously those new AMD GPUs just got announced. I may consider downgrading to them. Because generally speaking, underneath Linux, you will have a better experience out of the box with AMD GPUs and Ryzen processors. It's just all conveniently baked into the system, and it just all works better under most people's experiences. Mine as well. I have an AMD rig with Linux that just works better with my NVIDIA than my NVIDIA stuff for basically every game. In fact, every software. So if you can't help it, build an AMD system. If you don't have an AMD system and you want to get NVIDIA, still not an issue. But when you're picking your GPUs, you can pick Intel if you have an Intel GPU, NVIDIA if you want the open source GPUs, open source drivers for newer GPUs, Turing Plus. You can do Nouveau, you can go proprietary, or you can go VMware. I'm just going to go with all open source as the default right now. Now for Greeter, it should be SDDM. If you see that, you're fine. Now with audio, you can pick Pipewire or Pulse Audio. I'm going to go with Pipewire since that's basically the standard now. Hit enter. And of course in kernel, you can pick which kernels of Linux you want. So by default, you have the regular Linux. But I would say, just for safety's sake and stability's sake, install Linux LTS. There's also Linux Zen, which is more centered around being responsive to the user. I've never personally felt it being better, but you may want to enable that if you want to give it a try. So hit enter once you've added all your kernels. In network configuration, because we pick KDE Plasma, you can go use Network Manager, which is necessary to configure the internet graphically in GNOME and KDE Plasma. So once you hit enter there, go to additional packages. If you want to add any more packages, we're not going to do it. Go to optional repository and just hit enter on multilib. So that'll allow you to have 32-bit programs as well. Hit enter, go to time zone, and you can pick which time zone you're in. I'm US Eastern right here, so I'm going to go there. Automatic time sync, make sure that's yes. And once all of that is done, you can basically go to that big install button. You can basically hit yes, and like a nuclear bomb setting off, you can see the countdown going, 2, 1, boom. So basically at this moment, you can walk away, you can sip coffee in your new Some Ordinary Gamer's mug if you want to go check it out at the store. Also, you might want to remember that we have a beautiful command, sudo pacman s, which is basically how you're going to be installing your applications in your new Arch Linux system. Again, this is Arch Linux. It's supposed to be the most complicated, well, not the most complicated, but it's the most elitist version of Linux. And congratulations, you, with no experience, have just installed Arch Linux. Now, I want to remind you, this is not my recommended way. I would recommend you to actually install this from scratch, follow the instruction guide of the wiki, just so you understand how the system works, how to fix it down the road, how the guts of your system are functioning. It's worth doing once just as a learning experience, but if you just want to use Arch Linux, this is a shameless way, in my opinion, to have it working, okay? You shouldn't feel guilty for doing this. Now, as it's installing, you'll see all of these packages basically being loaded. And if you're into like hacker prompts, this might be interesting for you to watch how your system is doing this. But basically, the script we're using is just going through all of this and basically doing everything for you right now. Now, on your first boot for your Linux installation, you'll be granted with this screen, and you'll basically have 3 seconds to make a choice. Use your keypad to just basically get rid of the timer, and you want to highlight your Linux installation. So you can highlight Linux or Linux LTS. And if you use the D button, you can basically set a default entry, so it will just use that entry every time you boot in. Just so you never have to constantly fiddle around with this screen. I genuinely just like to use the LTS, so I'm going to hit enter over here, and Arch Linux is basically just booting up. And it'll go through this level of verbose boot up, and boom, ladies and gentlemen, Bob's your uncle. We are now presented with the login. So since we only have one user, Bob in this case, or Tom was in my installation medium, this is Bob, I'm going to log in to my account. So as you log in, the first screen you'll see right over here is this Welcome Center. Since we're using KDE Plasma, this has its own little Welcome Center right over here. And you'll notice, whoa, I've got this cute wallpaper in the background too. So of course, this is actually Linux installed. And for most people, you can get started right here. So of course, the further you go down over here, you can go through next, and it'll basically guide you through how to use your actual distribution. So if you want to learn things, this is a great little repository for you to learn how this user interface functions. But again, we're going to move past this, and we're actually going to start. So first things first, you might be like, Muda, I don't want my eyes flashbanged. Can you set this to dark mode? That's easy, my friend. Go to System Settings and just go to Breeze Dark and hit Apply. So of course, now we've got dark mode enabled. And you didn't even have to activate Linux to get access to basic personalization settings, huh? Now, of course, you can also go to things like power management and you can basically move things around. So for instance, if you don't want your computer to sleep, you can basically have it just do nothing and yada, yada, yada. But basically, it's already done, ladies and gentlemen. You can get things started. Now, Arch Linux, by default, is pretty bare bones. In fact, I don't even actually have a web browser installed. So remember that meme where it's like Linux users installing a web browser? I'm going to show you how to install a web browser in literally seconds. So we're going to go open up the terminal. So go to your start button or the KDE start button here. Go to the top and type in terminal and you'll see console. So open that up and you have that super scary Arch Linux console right here. So basically we're going to install a package. Now, much like on my hoodie over here, you see the package sudo pacman-S. So to install a package, you want to go sudo, which basically is your super user call. So this is, again, meant to invoke administrator privileges for whatever command you're calling. Now, because we're on Arch Linux, we're going to be using something known as pacman, which is, again, the package manager for Arch. So again, we're going to get capital, or we're going to hit space, and we're going to enter in an argument. So in order to update Arch Linux, generally speaking, you want to do -syu. And it's worth doing this once just to update your Linux installation periodically. This is the command you use to upgrade your system and all the packages on it. So it's going to ask you first time, hey, give us your super user password. Remember what you set it to in the installation and just set your updates. So there's actually one update that's available right now. Hit Y and just install that and boom, you're good to go. Updated. Boom. You didn't even have to blank out your screen or do anything cringe like that. It just all worked. So installing a web browser, super duper easy. Sudo pacman, S, and I believe one of the easier browsers to install right now is probably Firefox, right? You can get that installed just to start off with, but there are other browsers available as well. And of course, once you install Firefox, for instance, you can basically access it like so, and boom, it just works. So you see that command I typed in? Sudo pacman-S Firefox. It basically installed all the applications and packages I needed, and the actual installation of the browser was done faster than, to be honest, most other operating systems out there. Now, one of the first things you want to be doing in Arch Linux is installing a Arch user repository helper. So for instance, one of the most important things with Arch Linux is what we call the OR. Now the OR is the Arch user repository, so if there isn't a software that's available in the regular repositories, like for instance, Brave browser isn't available in the regular repositories, you can use the Arch or the OR to basically get that software and install it to your system. So whatever really isn't in the repositories is here. And this is such a powerful tool that it is in fact one of the reasons why you'd want to be using Arch Linux in the first place. So again, how do you get this working easily? So there's a tool known as Yay, but generally speaking, you want to go to Yay Arch Linux, Google that, and generally the second result, jgwer/yay, you want to go over here, and they'll basically have an entire guide set for you to install a pretty easy to use tool that will basically be used to help you with the Arch user repository. So generally speaking, when you go down to their installation, this is how you install the project from source. But what we're going to do is we're going to go all the way down and just get this command, which will basically do everything you see above here, all in just one easy command. Which is why I told you that terminal is kind of like the ultimate Swiss Army knife. So in order to do this, just copy this like so, go to the actual terminal you have, and realistically all you have to do is just paste that in here, hit enter, and it will ask you, again, for a password if you need to, hit yes, and boom, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. It has now created the Arch user repository and installed Yay to your system, so it basically makes it super easy for you to use. So boom, there it is, right in front of your eyes. Things get completely installed right there. So what do you use with Yay in order to actually install to your system? Now, simply to install Brave, you can type in the words Yay, and you can type in Brave. Actually, I don't need two Y's at the end of that. Since I'm in a VM, it's kind of a little more laggy than I expected. Basically, you want to hit enter and you get this big list right here, right? So for instance, when we want to install Brave, we can install or/Brave bin, which is the Brave binary. So you're not actually building the browser, you're just installing the binary, saving yourself a astronomical amount of time, by the way. So you see how that's number 3? All you have to do is type in the number 3, hit enter, and ladies and gentlemen, right here it's going to ask you if you want a clean build. You can type in A for all or N for no. And of course, difference to show, type in no, because you don't need to see anything unless you absolutely want to. And ladies and gentlemen, it's installing it right in front of you. So it's doing all of the complicated stuff right there in the script for you, and you can just basically watch it happen like magic. Now again, once you start really figuring out these commands, this will all become second nature to you, right? Like I said, I'm in a virtual machine, so it's actually advisable you start learning this way. You don't want to nuke your installation right now because that's absolutely going to make it terrible. If you don't know how to do this stuff, you might want to practice first in a virtual machine before you eventually do switch over. Remember, this is Linux. It has differences. It's not Windows. There are differences between the operating systems. Once you are comfortable, then consider making the complete switch. Or if this is too complicated for you, go to Linux Mint. It's just as good, just as efficient. This is just so you can actually install the elitist operating system with complete ease. And mind you, this is actually the easiest way to do it. So once we've installed Brave, you can open up your little start menu. You can basically see that Brave is right there. And this is pretty much equivalent for any browser you go to. If you want to install Edge, you want to install Chrome, you want to install whatever, you want to install LibreFox, it's all available like so. Now you might be like, well, Muda, I want to start gaming and talking on Discord with the boys. Well, you can install Steam and Discord right in front of your eyes. All you got to do is go to sudo pacman, like we showed you, capital S for installation anything. And of course, if you want to remove certain applications, you can do RS and then type in the name of the package you want to remove. So for instance, if you want to remove Firefox from your system, like I do, basically type in this command, enter your password, and it will say, you sure you want to get rid of Firefox? Type in yep, and it's gone. So let's say you want to install Steam and Discord like we wanted. Sudo pacman, capital S, Steam, and then of course you can even add in extra packages. So add Steam, add Discord, add whatever your heart desires, okay? You know, shit, you might want to install something like Lutris so you can install other launchers on your system. So if your games aren't on Steam, you can install it through other launchers like Lutris. So over here, it may ask you certain times to pick certain like repositories. So again, this is very much dependent on what GPU that I have. If you're on an NVIDIA GPU, you might want to pick number 2 for NVIDIA utils. But if you have an AMD GPU, you can pick the first one right here. I'm going to go pick up the first one. And just to make life super duper easy. And whoa, it's going to ask you, I'm installing 105 packages. Just hit yes and walk away. And it's doing all of that confusing work for you. So here it is, ladies and gentlemen, right in front of your eyes in literally seconds, faster than you can go to steam.com and discord.com and install. It's done all of that for you. So you can close that terminal right here. You can fire up Steam like so, and you can fire up Discord like so as well. Like for instance, do you want to use things like Flatpak, that little Discover store in the bottom? It's going to ask you to use this, install Flatpak. So it's super easy. Click on that installation and it will tell you exactly how to install Flatpak. So on the wiki page, it'll tell you install the Flatpak package. It's super easy. Open up your terminal like so. And since it's given you the exact name of the package, Flatpak, all you have to do is type in sudo pacman, capital S, Flatpak. Hit Y just for yes, and it will do all of that for you. It'll install, everything will be good to go. And at this moment in time, ladies and gentlemen, you are good to go. Once this is all done, you can open up that page once again, and you will have access to Flatpaks, meaning that if you want to play something like XIV Launcher and play FF14 on your system, it's totally doable, totally easy to install applications. All right, so that's all done. You can click on the actual store again, and whoa, you have access to Flatpaks. Now, this is basically like your traditional app store, and you can install whatever thing you want from here. So for instance, I typically get I shouldn't be saying this. I don't use this at all. You can get things like XIV Launcher and just basically play Final Fantasy XIV on your actual Linux distribution with no real issues whatsoever. Now, obviously, at this moment in time, once you've installed your system, this is back to my main computer right over here. Firing up Steam, this is what your actual Steam installation will look like. And one of the first things you want to be doing on your Steam installation is going to that big Steam button, going to Settings, and basically making sure down over here in Compatibility, this will be available for Linux users, just enable Steam Play for all titles. And of course, it'll ask you to restart Steam, and once you've done that, it is so simple to just download your games from Steam as if you were on Windows and play them right there. So for instance, playing something like Ghost Runner, right, which if you click this little information button, you'll see that it's running on my computer via Steam Play. Now, there are some games that have native Linux installations, but you can even run the Windows version if you want. Sometimes it's actually better to do that. So for instance, to play this game, it's literally as simple as hitting that big green play button, selecting whatever DirectX I want, in this case it's 12, and just firing up the game. Now, sometimes you'll see things like processing Vulkan shaders. I typically skip this or I disable this feature because I generally find it to be too much of a drain on my resources and drives. But if you're looking carefully, ladies and gentlemen, this is a Windows game completely functioning right underneath on Linux. And again, if you were to sit somebody down, they probably would have no idea that they were actually playing on Linux. And again, there's also anti-cheats that I'm sure people are going to mention in the comment section, like, hey, you can't play certain games on your system. And that's fine, okay? I actually have a computer back there to play games like Rainbow Six Siege, which uses kernel anti-cheat. That's a price I'm willing to pay to have my computer owned by me. So here it is, a game functioning, and if you look in the bottom left, something interesting that I've done is I've actually injected the newest versions of DLSS easily underneath my actual installation. So here I can play this Ghost Runner installation with the most updated feature sets, ray tracing as well, and just play it as if it was Windows. I mean, seriously, it's actually insane how well games are functioning on this system. And again, if you have AMD drivers, AMD hardware, I generally find the experience to be a lot better underneath that. But yeah, this is a full game running on my system as if it was an actual Windows installation. I mean, again, it really does show you how easy it is. I used, by the way, one of the more complicated, most elite Linux systems to help you get involved and get this stuff set up. And again, it literally allows you to have access to your own hardware. It allows you to actually realize that there's more competition available than what you knew before. Look, if Windows 11 isn't for you and you want to eventually make the transition to something that does support your hardware, this video is entirely to show you that Linux is there, okay? Like, it actually functions. And you know, this isn't the only game that you can play. You can play stuff like Cyberpunk 2077. You can play a lot of modern games underneath Linux. A lot of single-player stuff actually works better and works about the same as I would imagine on Windows, or on Linux as well. Now, as far as the gaming compatibility, there's sites like ProtonDB, which will show you just how compatible certain games are. And look, for the most part, Linux is pretty much there. You know, for most single-player games, which is pretty much where I'm sitting at, it generally does support most, you know, it supports most of the popular single-player experiences out there. Now, obviously, when it comes to software, using this technology and using things like Lutris or Bottles, you can possibly run some of your Windows software underneath Linux as well, too. Now, obviously, not all software will be functional. For instance, I can't run Adobe Premiere on it, which is fine since I am transitioning to more friendly solutions, but that is something to take into consideration. If you do use certain software that needs Windows, you may need to have a dual boot ready, or maybe you might not be able to switch because some hardware, some software just doesn't work underneath Linux. And of course, it really is up to Linux getting more popular over time for the actual developer to consider it. The focal point of the video was getting you to switch to a version of Linux, an elitist version of Linux, and getting it installed with literal minutes. Getting it set up, getting your basic programs running, and from here, the world is your oyster. You can do whatever you want. You can basically start following that wiki and learning this for yourself. And boom, lo and behold, in a matter of weeks, you might become a Linux wizard, a true virgin, a true master of this craft. But for now, I've given you the basis, I've given you the stepping stone, I've shown you how many wins Linux has taken, and I've shown you just how to switch to it. Now it's up to you to go off into your venture and do whatever you want with your own system and your own software that you finally have complete control of. No more requiring Windows and its nosy AI and telemetry. You now own your own computer and you control what runs on every facet of this system. So if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike if you dislike it. I am out.